Hello there, my friend. Welcome to episode 334 of Stand Up with Pete Dominic Daily. Joining me today, Professor Eric Siegel, Georgia State University, will join me to talk about the latest issues regarding the Supreme Court. Should we pack it? Should we weaken it? Amy Coney Barrett's book deal, and, of course, voter suppression laws, and why he hates the Shelby County verdict and thinks about it far too often or not enough. Also joining me for, I think, the first time on the podcast, a guy I've known and admired for a very long time. He's a stand-up comedian, very, very widely respected, an elder statesman in our business, and his new comedy album is charting #1 right now on the comedy charts. Jim David will join me, and I've got a great last 24 coming up for you. So very excited to have you joining me here on the podcast. Thank you very much for your support. Hope to see you on Thursday night at our virtual hangout. What should we talk about? I have a question for you right now. Maybe we can talk about this. It's, if you're not a lifelong learner, what are you? And it's not a judgment. It's not, I'm not saying one thing is good or bad, but I was thinking about this today. I've been thinking a lot about something Bill Maher said on Real Time on Friday night. I almost always listen to that show. My wife and I both listen to it. He gets me really fired up and pisses me off a lot, and then he says things that I think make so much sense and that I agree with, and he often makes me laugh really hard at his jokes. I know a lot of women, a lot of Muslims, a lot of people of color don't like him, and they make a lot of good arguments, but I still listen to the show. I enjoy it. I get a lot out of many of the guests and conversations, but he was talking about basically how he's fed up with everybody being called a racist. And, you know, Bill Maher's been pretty good on race, one might argue. Maybe not so much on Muslims but and women. But anyway, he was basically saying he's an old man. He knows what he's talking about, and he's tired of it. You know, I'm paraphrasing here. And I just really irked me. Like, don't you always want to keep learning? At what point do you get to a place where you say, I know it all. I already know this. I can't imagine that for myself. I mean, I'm 45 years old. Maybe at some point, maybe when you turn 55, or if you're lucky to get older, 65, 75, maybe at some point you just said, you know what? I know it all. I don't need to keep learning. But I hope I never get there. I don't want to ever get there. And that's why I do this show. That's why I do the work I do, because I love learning. I love talking to these people and learning along with you. I love learning from you. So many people in this show's audience and the history of it are so wise, so generous and thoughtful and really smart. And I love getting to know you and talking with you. And so if you're not a lifelong learner, what are you? When it comes to race in America, when it comes to so many of the very important issues that are consequential, at least I think they are, don't you just want to keep learning? I do, which is why I do the show every day, which is why I love doing it, which is even though it takes a lot of time, some nights I'm just too exhausted, but I keep plowing ahead because I like doing it. I like learning. I like learning along with you. And this trial of Derek Chauvin has been, I think, exhausting and emotionally draining and so disconcerting. And here we are at the end, and within hours or days, we'll know. Maybe you'll know by the time this is playing. You probably will, as a matter of fact, especially if you listen a day or two in delay. But for those of you that are listening on Tuesday, the 20th, I just want to say it's been tough. And I have a few things I simply want to read to you about this, several things I want to play for you. So let's get to talking about all of the issues that took place in that matter in the last 24 hours and regularly and in general, because outside of the Derek Chauvin trial, you have former Vice President Walter Mondale dying at 93. You've got the Mars lunar helicopter flying away and so many other things that I want to share with you here. A lot of news on climate and climate summits and agreements and things happening. But I want to start the last 24 right now by reading, just setting this up a little bit. This is a professor at University of Texas, Austin, read in an editorial in the Washington Post titled, "Derek Chauvin's Trials Not Justice for Black Americans. Chauvin should be found guilty of second-degree murder, but a conviction would not offer the kind of national catharsis on race and policing that America longs for. One former police officer being held accountable for the death of another innocent black person is not a sea change. It speaks only to the strength of the prosecution, the pathos of the testimony, the weight of the evidence, and the sentiments of 12 jurors. Full black citizenship and dignity, the twin goals of the civil rights movement, will come about only when we can create a world where George Floyd and Dante Wright are allowed to flourish and live instead of becoming martyrs of a system that ensures that black lives matter less than white ones. That's Professor Peniel Joseph in the Washington Post. I thought that was really powerful, and I wanted to share that with you. And also share from early March, just before the trial began, from Minnesota's biggest newspaper, the Star Tribune. They wrote about just the global kind of impact that this has had. And let me just skip around in that piece. They say, George Floyd pleading for his life under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer has become a defining moment of our time. What began 10 months ago at the corner of 38th Street and Chicago Avenue has transformed into nothing less than an American reckoning on justice, racial equality, the proper role of law enforcement, and the historical wrongs society has perpetrated on black people. Chauvin's knee became a symbol of black oppression worldwide in Australia and Japan and France and Germany and Kazakhstan and Indonesia. For some, Chauvin's knee on Floyd's neck told a story of America's history of racism. Calls for an overhaul of policing to defund or even abolish police also functioned as calls to disrupt America's power structures. And then finally, in this piece at the Minnesota Star Tribune, they say, the cataclysmic national moment that began 10 months ago at the corner of 38th and Chicago will not come to a tidy end at the conclusion of Chauvin's trial. The three other officers at the scene are scheduled to be tried in August, and Floyd's death is certain to reverberate much longer than that. But Martin Luther King III, the oldest son of the civil rights icon, said he believes the impact of this trial cannot be overstated. An acquittal would mean our criminal justice system must be rethought. Well, I don't want to tell Martin Luther King III what he certainly already knows, but our criminal justice system must be rethought is something that his father came to the conclusion of, and so many of us have, and I'm sure he has many times as well. But obviously that is something that has to happen. I thought reading those pieces and paragraphs and sentences would be a good way of setting up just kind of the impact and the framing and the consequences of this trial and what it means for America and for the global human civilization. I mean, this is such a big moment in our history. And I also wanted to make clear that one way or another, it's not going to change the world. We have so much further to go here in America. I mean, we need massive law enforcement reform. We need to recreate policing. We need to redefine policing. We need to change the responsibilities and funding mechanisms that law enforcement gets. We need to end the drug war and so much more. There are actually some really great ideas out there, and I should probably have the guests who are behind those ideas on this program to try to understand and explain them and make the case for them. Now let's get to the trial of Derek Chauvin, where yesterday the jury heard closing arguments, and I want to play a few clips for you to set it up. Of course, there's this controversy about Congressman Maxine Waters and how that plays in. I've got it all for you, so let's do it. Starting with the closing arguments from the prosecution in the case. This is Special Assistant Attorney General Steve Schleicher.
Imagining a police officer committing a crime might be the most difficult thing you have to set aside, because that's just not the way we think of police officers. We trust the police. We trust the police to help us. We believe the police are going to respond to our call for help. We believe they're going to listen to us. This is not an anti-police prosecution. It's a pro-police prosecution.
Well, that short soundbite got a lot of attention, and here is more.
This case is exactly what you thought when you saw it first. When you saw that video, it is exactly that. You can believe your eyes. It's exactly what you believed. It's exactly what you saw with your eyes. It's exactly what you knew. It's what you felt in your gut. It's what you now know in your heart. This wasn't policing. This was murder.
All right, that is Special Assistant Attorney General Steve Schleicher. Now, here is the defense, who you saw a lot of, if you were paying attention. His name is Eric Nelson, and he played the old trope of blaming the victim in the case.
Sometimes reasonable police officers take someone into custody with no problem, and suddenly they become a problem. It can change in an instant. The 9 minutes and 29 seconds ignores the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds. It completely disregards it. It says, in that moment, at that point, nothing else that happened before should be taken into consideration by a reasonable police officer. It is not uncommon for suspects to feign or pretend to have a medical emergency to avoid being arrested. Unfortunately, that is the reality. Nobody likes to get arrested, and reasonable police officers know that. How many times does someone, oh, my heart hurts, or I'm having a medical emergency, insert whatever emergency, right? Simply because they don't want to go to jail.
Yikes, I did not like that very much at all, and nor did a lot of people. Not a great argument from the defense, at least not in that soundbite. Also, the big controversy yesterday was that Eric Nelson got all upset that Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who was out in Minneapolis talking with protesters the other night, and was asked this by one of the protesters.
Congresswoman, what happens if we do not get what you just told? What should the people do? What should protesters on the street do?
I didn't hear you.
What happens?
What should protesters do?
Well, we got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business.
And when Congresswoman Waters answered that protester's question by saying we have to get more confrontational, the right lost its mind, and Eric Nelson, Derek Chauvin's lawyer, decided he had the argument to make for a mistrial, and he made that argument, and the judge, while making weird comments that I think were inappropriate, dismissed it. And here is Hennepin County District Judge Peter Cahill, who's been presiding over this the most high-profile trial we've seen in a very long time. And here's how he handled it.
I'm aware that Congresswoman Waters was talking specifically about this trial and about the unacceptability of anything less than a murder conviction, and talk about being confrontational. But you can submit the press articles about that. This goes back to what I've been saying from the beginning. I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch and our function. I think if they want to give their opinions, they should do so in a respectful and in a manner that is consistent with their oath to the Constitution, to respect a co-equal branch of government. Their failure to do so, I think, is abhorrent, but I don't think it has prejudiced us with additional material that would prejudice this jury. They have been told not to watch the news. I trust they are following those instructions, and that there is not in any way a prejudice to the defendant beyond the articles that we're talking specifically about the facts of this case. A congresswoman's opinion really doesn't matter a whole lot. Anyway, so motion for mistrial is denied.
So he said a lot there, but the most important thing he said was at the end, motion for mistrial is denied. And last night on MSNBC, my friend Katie Fang was asked about that moment and the judge and just everything he said. And she had this to say.
Well, it was odd because Judge Cahill throughout the entirety of this proceedings has been reserved like a jurist should be, and hasn't offered any type of commentary about what's going on like a jurist should do. But you know what? Listen, the context of that exchange is the fact that the defense has consistently been attempting to have this jury sequestered. It has asked repeatedly. It has been denied repeatedly by Judge Cahill. We know that the jurors are not being sequestered today as they begin deliberations. However, it just is another reason, another ground for an appellate issue that perhaps Derek Chauvin is going to have to be counting on in the event he is found guilty of any one of the three offenses that he's currently being charged with. But it was a very kind of chilling dialogue to hear. grateful, of course, that it didn't happen in front of the jury. It would never happen in front of the jury. The jury had already been excused and taken away by the deputy to start their deliberations. But again, it's in the context of the idea that this jury should never have heard about the Daunte Wright shooting, never heard about the Adam Toledo shooting, never heard about, the potential for further, riots and protesting. And so I think that's exactly what people need to realize was the context within which that dialogue occurred today.
Katie Fang has been doing a great job on Twitter and on TV and everywhere else, helping us understand some of the legal issues and criticisms around this. And here is Jelani Cobb of PBS and The New Yorker, who was also on MSNBC last night. I loved what he had to say, as always.
Yeah, I think that some of this is a kind of political rhetoric and calculated, but it points to a bigger dynamic that I think is much more substantial. We have seen, in this case, the police come out against Derek Chauvin in a way that you almost never see in previous cases. And it's been because the outrage that video generated, worldwide outrage, where it became a national indictment on the global stage, that the blowback from that was so significant that the system itself went into self-preservation mode. The city council voted to disband the police department, something that would be inconceivable otherwise. And so what we've seen now is, as opposed to the standard arguments to try to say that the person who's accused is actually innocent and that we should side with the police officer, we have seen an effort to say that the system itself is innocent. And therefore, this police officer doesn't represent some bigger systemic problem. And I think that was the final statement from the closing statement from the prosecutor was right in line with the implications of that strategy.
And one more clip from Jelani Cobb. I'm getting greedy here and taking sound bites from MSNBC, but I just love what he had to say here.
And so the difference between this case has always been not the fact that a police officer made a judgment call, which the public, large segments of the public at least, are very hesitant to question, but the person did something over the course of 9 minutes and 29 seconds, excruciatingly long.
Yes.
And there's just very little that you can say that would defend the idea that that entire time he had to maintain that posture on Mr. Floyd's neck.
Really interesting insights, as always, on Chris Hayes' show and a lot of the shows on MSNBC where they get great experts, policy experts, historians, journalists, and obviously criminal justice folks. A lot of minority, brilliant black folks on MSNBC, many of which also join me here. But then you head over to Fox News, where there are white supremacists in the primetime slots, specifically Tucker Carlson, who I do want to play about 30, 40 seconds of what he had to say, just to give you perspective. I know this is triggering and super upsetting here, which is why I won't play the whole 4-minute opening clip. But this is the way that he led and focused on Maxine Waters and compared Black Lives Matter to the insurrection. It's mind-numbing and really enraging, but I gotta play it.
Too often, Republicans waste time highlighting the hypocrisy of the left. Is BLM more dangerous than the fake insurrectionists who showed up at the Capitol on January 6th? Well, yeah, obviously.
What?
Is Maxine Waters guilty of greater incitement than Donald Trump? Well, of course.
What?
But that's not the point. People like Maxine Waters don't care if you point out that they're hypocrites. They don't care if you catch them lying. You're wasting your breath when you point this out. They're not ashamed. They never will be ashamed. So how do you respond to people like this? Well, the only thing you can do is tell the truth about who they are. Maxine Waters is someone who supports mob.
Okay, that's enough. She's someone who supports mob rule. Tucker Carlson talking about shame. I mean, Republicans being outraged by mean tweets and some tough rhetoric. I mean, he said they need to be maybe more confrontational. Is so on brand for Republicans after 4 years of Donald Trump terrorizing us day in and day out with his cruel and selfish reign. His behavior regularly shocked us because we couldn't imagine anyone acting like he did, let alone an elected leader. For Republicans now to act outraged by Maxine Waters, it's just too much. And now to cleanse your palate, here is the MyPillow guy, Mike Lindell, getting prank called while he was doing some kind of live stream. I don't know what he was doing, but this is fantastic. If you haven't seen it, and even if you have or heard it, it's worth. I've seen it like 50 times, and it's always good.
Breaking news here with a guest.
Hello?
Hello, yes, I have Mr. Trump on standby. Are you ready?
Yes.
Go ahead, sir. Hello, everyone.
We have the president here, our real president, everyone. Hello, Mr. President.
MacronShow.com, bitches.
MacronShow.com.
All right.
I
Sorry,
guess that
folks.
wasn't. I guess that was. You see what they're doing? They're attacking us. And this is what. It even came up. They're hacking into our phones. It came up that it was a legitimate number.
Call.
A legitimate. I know the number's coming from.
See, they got me. How did they? Oh, he was so flustered. It was absolutely beautiful. Okay, what else do I have to play for you? Oh, here from ABC News, the nightly news broadcast. David Muir is the anchor, who grew up around the corner from me. I don't know him, but went to the school next to mine. Anyway, they got an exclusive with the Attorney General, and I wanted to just play a little bit of their broadcast from last night. Yesterday was the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing. Merrick Garland was the lead investigator into that horrible terrorist attack. Take a listen.
On the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, his warning tonight on domestic extremism right now in the U.S. and what he says still needs to be addressed in this country when it comes to race and justice. Our Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas with the Attorney General.
The closing arguments beginning in the Chauvin trial as we speak. What would your message to the American public be pending the verdict in the jury?
I intend to wait until the verdict before I will say anything, and I would urge the American people to do the same, to await the verdict. We will use every resource we have available to ensure that equal justice occurs.
Do you believe there is still pockets of racism and bias within law enforcement, and how widespread do you think it is?
Racism is an American problem. I think that plain to me that there's has been and remains discrimination against African Americans and other communities of color and other ethnic minorities. I think it's reflected in discrimination in housing, in employment, in the justice system. All of these things are still in America. We do not yet have equal justice under law.
David, Garland was here today in Oklahoma City on the anniversary of that horrific bombing 26 years ago. He says the threat of domestic terror right now is high. In fact, he said it's increasing. And David, he acknowledges that some of the same forces that led to that bombing are still at play today. White supremacy, militia extremists, lies, and conspiracies, David.
I thought that was pretty good. Pretty good reporting. I liked what Merrick Garland had to say. And I'll change gears again by playing a great clip from young Greta Thunberg talking vaccine inequality, the power of science, and the link between the pandemic and the climate crisis. I found this from the last 24 and want to share it with you.
Today, up to 75% of all emerging diseases come from animals. And as we are cutting down forests and destroying habitats, we are creating the ideal conditions for diseases to spill over from one animal to another and then to us. And we can no longer separate the health crisis from the ecological crisis, and we cannot separate the ecological crisis from the climate crisis. It's all interlinked in many ways. And during this pandemic, we have seen what we can achieve when we put resources into science. Vaccines were developed in record time. But so far, on average, 1 in 4 people in high-income countries have received a coronavirus vaccine, compared with just 1 in over 500 in low- and middle-income countries. And the international community, governments, and vaccine developers must step up their game and address the tragedy that is vaccine inequity.
Yeah, love that Greta Thunberg. She is just fantastic. One of the most important young people of her generation, for sure. And speaking of science, the NASA has successfully flown a small helicopter on Mars. Here's some sound from the headquarters yesterday, where they launched this rotorcraft carried to Mars in the belly of the Perseverance rover, which touched down on the red planet back in February. Pretty cool. Congratulations. I think I read 178 million miles to Mars. It's a really long way. I hope Elon Musk has a good time traveling there. Okay, so before I wrap up the last 24, I do just want to mention while I was putting the show together tonight, news broke that former vice president, presidential candidate, and senator, as well as the guy who appointed a woman, put a woman on the ticket, Walter Mondale, Fritz was his nickname, passed away at the age of 93, the 42nd vice president of the United States. He was Jimmy Carter's president in 1977 to 1981. Couple of quick reactions on Twitter. President Obama wrote, Walter Mondale championed progressives' causes. Look, and changed the role of VP. So leaders like Joe Biden could be the last ones in the room when decisions were made. In selecting Geraldine Ferraro, he also paved the way for @VP to make history. Michelle and I send prayers to his family. What else do we have here? I can't do a very good impression of. Jimmy Carter, a statement from President Jimmy Carter in the passing of Walter Mondale. Today, I mourn the passing of my dear friend Walter Mondale, who I consider the best vice president in our country's history. During our administration, Fritz used his political skill and personal integrity to transform the vice presidency into a dynamic policy-driving force that had never seen before and still exists today. He was an invaluable partner and an able servant of the people of Minnesota, the United States, and the world. Fritz Mondale provided us all with a model for public service and private behavior. Rosalind and I join all Americans in giving thanks for his exemplary life, and we extend our deepest condolences to his family. Walter Mondale spoke by phone on Sunday with President Biden, former President Jimmy Carter, and Bill Clinton, as well as Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. I mean, that's pretty crazy. He knew he was going to die, and the day before he died, he got all those people on the phone. He was a pretty big deal, Walter Mondale. And you know what? Had he beat Reagan, I think this country would have been a much better place. But what the hell do I know about rewriting history? Walter Mondale, gone at 93, but what a life. And finally, in other news, in COVID news, a race to untangle the secrets of the blood clots after the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And most importantly, everybody is eligible as of today. President Biden released a video urging vaccinations. The nationwide pause on the use of Johnson & Johnson, by the way, likely to be lifted by Friday, according to Dr. Fauci, nation's top infectious disease expert. Are you familiar with his work? Researchers at Oxford plan to deliberately reinfect healthy individuals who recovered from COVID-19 in a new trial tracking immune response to the virus. The long-awaited reciprocal travel bubble between New Zealand and Australia finally opened Monday, reuniting long-divided family and friends, as well as opening the way for a flood of Australian visitors to New Zealand. Law enforcement officials warned that burgeoning trade in counterfeit coronavirus vaccination cards could spur the spread of coronavirus even as the United States looks to open up again. India's capital will implement a week-long lockdown as a steep rise in coronavirus cases overwhelms the city's hospitals. India witnessing the most new cases of infection in the world with more than 200,000 a day. And despite major gains in vaccination, the increase in daily new cases in our country has been steady for months, with many states showing substantial surges. More than 566,000 people have died of COVID-19 in the United States. All right, so that's a little COVID-19 update. You got your political stories. You got, what else can I tell you? A lot of confusion and controversy over the fact that we are now finding out that the police officer who was killed in the insurrection, Brian Sicknick, apparently his autopsy 3 months later, the results now coming out, a lot of people questioning just that, was that he died of natural causes, which is creating a lot of concern and hesitancy for just about everybody. What took so long? And really, he wouldn't have died. He would have died that day without getting the shit kicked out of him and sprayed by bear spray. It's just, it's tough for a lot of folks to swallow. And so I'm sure a lot of questions are going to be continue to be asked about that. Protests across Russia to save Alexei Navalny. Military buildup near Ukraine. More than 150,000 Russian troops on the border. And while Donald Trump is saying that we should boycott Coke, his own properties are still serving Coke. I like that headline. All right, now it's time for everything else. It's not COVID. It's not politics. It's not the Derek Chauvin trial. It is the news dump. Take it away, Pete Coe.
Feral cat is in your yard acting like a grump. It's Velcro to your thigh on today's news dump.
Oh, no. Feral cat velcroed to my thigh. Did you see the video of that guy with the bobcat? I wonder if that was the inspiration. He saved his wife from being attacked by a bobcat. I watched that one like 450 times. All right, let's get to it. I'm going to start with 3 animal-related stories, and this first one I liked. A suspected poacher was trampled to death by a herd of elephants in South Africa's Kruger National Park on Saturday, according to South African National Park, published on Sunday. 3 suspected poachers were attempting to flee park rangers when they ran into a breeding herd of elephant. One of the suspects realized they were being pursued. They dropped an axe and a bag with their provisions and ran away from the rangers, but when they caught up with them, they discovered one of the guys badly trampled. You know, I shouldn't be rooting for this, because the truth is a lot of these poachers aren't terrible human beings that want to take the life of rare and beautiful animals. They actually have very few other ways to make a living. There's a lot there, but anyway, I thought I'd mention that one. Then how about this one? A grizzly bear mauled a backcountry guide near Yellowstone. A Montana backcountry guide has died after he was mauled by a large grizzly bear just outside Yellowstone National Park, probably defending a moose carcass, officials said. And one more. Otters at the Georgia Aquarium apparently have tested positive for COVID-19. Georgia Aquarium announced that their Asian small-clawed otters have tested positive for COVID-19, the latest animals to contract the highly contagious virus. Now let me move on to 2 stories I mentioned in yesterday's news dump. First, there was this deadly crash, Tesla crash, where there was nobody in the driver's seat. Apparently, the passengers were in the back seat, and as a result, Tesla shares dropped 3.7% and traded on Wall Street yesterday. And also, I mentioned that the Peloton treadmill was killing animals and kids. Well, guess what? Peloton shares also fell more than 7% following an urgent warning from the U.S. government telling owners of the company's treadmill to stop using the machine. But Peloton refused to recall its treadmill after 39 accidents. And now, guess what? Its stock is tumbling. Wanted to mention that the West is preparing for its first possible water shortage declaration. U.S. water officials are projecting the man-made lakes that store water used throughout the American West will fall to historically low levels and trigger an official shortage declaration for the first time. Apple is reinstating the Parler app, but standing by their initial ban. The app was banned from the App Store shortly after the January 6th Capitol riot. The conservative-oriented social media website that was banned from Apple's App Store is going to be reinstated. The senior director of government affairs at Apple, Timothy Powderly, that's his name, Powderly, wrote a letter to Republican congressman saying that Parler had been allowed back in the company's App Store as of April 14th. Noted that the app had been banned for including posts that encouraged violence, denigrated various ethnic groups, races, and religions, glorified Nazism, and called for violence against specific people. So I'm sure it's going to be so much better once it's back. And finally, Major League Baseball seeing record-high streaming viewership despite the All-Star Game backlash. How about that? Major League Baseball saying that they are seeing more than 1.3 billion minutes of streams through its first 3 weekends of 2021, whatever that means. 12% increase, I guess that's what it means, compared with the first 18 days of the shortened 2020 season, and up 43% compared with the same time frame for the 2019 season. Unfortunately, the Yankees are absolutely horrendous, apparently. All right, well, that is your news dump and the last 24. You get that each and every day here on Stand Up. Takes me a lot of work to put together, but I love doing it for you. But please consider supporting this podcast, which is daily, with a paid subscription if you haven't already. Go to patreon.com/PeteDominic. And by the way, you may hear me reading an ad starting this week, and I hope that's cool. I'm not going to read ads for any companies that I think are morally reprehensible, but it might be an ad that helps you find a job. So be on the lookout for that. And I appreciate your support, but I can't do a daily show without all the resources needed. Because while it is free, it ain't cheap. So thank you for your support. Hopefully you're cool with me reading an ad or two from time to time. If anybody gets fired up, if you're a paying subscriber, you just let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com, and I'll send you a very special episode. All right, coming up, legendary comedian Jim David, whose new comedy album charting #1 on the comedy charts. But right now, let's get to my first guest. Joining me right now is Professor Eric Siegel. He's a regular here. He joins me at least once a month, if not every other week or so. And he is a constitutional law scholar, of course, the author of Supreme Myths, Why the Court is Not a Court, as well as Originalism as Faith. And we love Siegel here on Stand Up. We love hearing from him. We love his thoughts. Doesn't mean he's always right. He's just really good at presenting these arguments and keeping us informed and educated on important issues. He's got his own podcast now. It's called Supreme Myths. I highly recommend you head over there, subscribe, and give him a rating so more people will listen, because we love when he joins us here on Stand Up. At eSpinSiegel on Twitter. Here we go. Okay, here he is, Eric Siegel, joining me now. Lots to discuss with you. The Supreme Court, packing the court, weak in the court. Amy Coney Barrett, plenty to talk about there. And most importantly to me, every time you read a certain decision, it makes you nauseous. Can we start there?
Yes, sure. I didn't know that tweet was going to go get such attention, but it did. Hello, everybody. I'm warning you in advance. I'm in a mood. Expect some rants.
I like it.
I tweeted out on Sunday morning, I think, I'm teaching Shelby County versus Holder tomorrow night. That is the case where the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. That is the case where Chief Justice Roberts lied about many different I'm using the word lied there because that's what he did. He lied about many different things. And that was the case where next day, North Carolina, Texas, and various other jurisdictions started planning to disenfranchise people of color from voting. It is one of the few cases that I tell my students, I'm going to present this case to you and I'm not going to be objective. Now, if you argue with me, you get points. Like, it's great if you argue with me, but I am not pretending to present this academically. I am presenting this to you as it is in the real world because it's so important and so wrong.
Why that case? I mean, you could do that with every case, couldn't you? Or every
okay, so there are a couple of reasons. One, it is an incredibly important case. Two, so Justice Roberts writes that opinion 5-4 in 2013. In 1981, did I mention 1981? He wrote a memo at the Justice Department saying that the Voting Rights Act is a great intrusion on states and it should be limited. So this was a vendetta of his from 1981 to 2013. Another thing is that he cites a previous case of his that dealt with the Voting Rights Act, where which he relies on in Shelby County, where he uses, I'm not making this up, Pete, I've written about it several times, so have others. He uses ellipses. Ellipses are those three dots where you have missing text, for those of you listening. And he did so in a way that is about as misleading as any Supreme Court justice in history. The case was South Carolina versus Katzenbach, 1965, challenge to the Voting Rights Act, as initially implemented in 1965. South Carolina argues, wait a minute, Supreme Court, Congress cannot treat us differently than other states. That's not allowed. And the court responded, of course that's allowed. There is no principle of equal state treatment. There is a principle that if two different states want to come into the union at the same time, they come in under similar conditions. But once in the union, there is no principle of equal state sovereignty. Roberts only cites the first part of that, where it says if you come into the union, you have to be treated equally. He then uses ellipsis to say, therefore, Congress has to treat different states the same. That's a lie, Pete. It's not what the court says. And he never says he's overturning that case. He simply uses ellipses to remove the key part of the case, which was there is no principle that Congress has to treat different states differently. Sorry, I'm done with that. Okay.
Well, let me just what is the history of the ideological movement against voting rights? I feel like you don't have to be a constitutional scholar to just understand basic voting rights. And most countries, by the way, should be, once you're a legal age, you decide on some arbitrary age, 18, 21, I don't know. You're an American citizen. You can vote.
Right.
Or not.
Well, of course, our history is that although the 15th Amendment, well, of course, before the Civil War, only white male with property basically voted. And then the 15th Amendment is passed after the Civil War, saying that the right to vote cannot be denied on the basis of race. And although it was still denied on the basis of gender until 1919, when the 19th Amendment was passed. But starting in the early 1870s, the Supreme Court abandoned any attempt to enforce the 15th Amendment, and literacy tests and character tests and personality tests were used by many, many, many states, mostly in the South, but other places too, to stop black people from voting. And that went all the way up to 1965. And that's when Martin Luther King and Lyndon Johnson together got Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act, which was supposed to change that. That is the same Voting Rights Act Justice Roberts gutted in 2013, saying leaving aside the legal mumbo jumbo, he said, it's gotten much better, and the concerns that originally gave rise to this act no longer exist, to which Justice Ginsburg responded, that's like leaving your umbrella at home during a rainstorm.
And of course, immediately, as you started this, the states took advantage of that change, and now we see what it has wrought with subsequent elections and voter oppression and suppression. You know, by the way, you always hear this argument about the data. Well, in fact, more people voted since we put in these voter reforms. More people voted. You hear that a lot, and I think people miss the point sometimes because they don't live in black communities, or live black lives. But generally, when there's this kind of injustice and indignity done to black folks in terms of taking away their hard-earned rights to vote, they come out madder and more determined to vote. So they become more aware of what's being impugned upon them. And even though it's harder for them to vote, they come out and they wait in lines and they do whatever they have to vote. It just seems like a weird statistic to always cite. It kind of disregards the determination of black voters who know exactly what's being done to them and don't want to allow for it.
I agree with that, Pete, 100%. I have nothing to add. I will add, as a matter of constitutional law, for those people out there, if there are any, who are listening who don't really understand the devastatingly horrific nature of the Shelby County decision, the 15th Amendment is not unclear as to who is supposed to enforce it. It says voting will not be, denied based on based on race, and Congress shall enforce this through appropriate legislation. That's what it says. That's a direct quote. That word appropriate, Pete, is everything. Because what it means is what it should mean, is as long as Congress is doing something reasonable. Now, if it's irrational, if it's totally, arbitrary and capricious, then no, that's not appropriate. But in the law, appropriate means reasonable, rational, it's a reasonable effort to do something. To argue that the Voting Rights Act in 2013 was not a reasonable effort by the Congress, unanimously passed by the Senate, overwhelmingly passed by the House, signed enthusiastically by a Republican president, to say that 2013, which was the Voting Rights Bill is actually 2006, to say that law was not appropriate, it is judicial hubris to the max. Yeah. It is anti-originalist. It is anti-textual. It is anti-everything, which, going back to your originalist question, is that's why I tell my students I can't be objective. I will listen to arguments fairly, but I can't be objective because the Constitution itself tells us who is supposed to enforce this ban on race discrimination in voting, because it's been such a scourge for us. Yeah. And that body is not the court. It's not Roberts. It's not Ginsburg. It is Congress. And Congress acted reasonably, unanimously, the Senate in 2006 when it said, we've come some way. We've made some progress. You know why we made progress? Because of the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah. It is always worth mentioning and remembering, and often does not get mentioned in this argument, that overwhelmingly the United States Senate, a very divided Senate, voted to approve of the Voting Rights Act in 2001. Unanimously. And then, as you always say, and then the court overturned it, which has long been your case, that they have too much power, which leads us to the next question.
Wait. I'm sorry. Before the next point, at oral argument in Shelby County, Justice Scalia referred to voting rights as racial entitlement. Nothing more needs to be said. That may have been the first voting rights case, but that's what he said.
Do you think anything, by the way, has changed? Has Justice Roberts, he has surprised folks, including you, with several of his votes during the Trump era, especially. And I wonder if he has signaled, or if anything has changed based on what he said in his decision in Shelby County and what has actually happened as a result of his decision, Is there anything that signals that maybe he realizes he might have been wrong and might surprise us again on voting rights cases in the future?
No, nothing, zero, nada, nothing.
Huh.
Senator Whitehouse has compiled the list, I've said this before on your podcast, of like 75 voting cases, many of which came after 2000, some of which came after 2013. Republicans always win. Look, Pete, above all else, maybe above all else, Justice Roberts wants to protect his history, his own. There've only been 8 Chief Justices. Isn't that amazing? He's the 8th Chief Justice of the United States. I had. I'm going to plug my podcast on yours. I had Emily Bazelon on today. She's a fantastic writer for the New York Times.
Yeah, that's great. I saw that.
And we were talking about Roberts because she wrote a long piece on Roberts once, and she was saying it is the Roberts Court. I mean, it's what it's called. I mean, it's not the Roberts Court, but it's what it's called. And he is clearly concerned with his name, his reputation, and the court's reputation. As by the way, he should be as Chief Justice. Having said that, the next most important thing to him is he's a Republican, and he votes Republican. It's what he does. Pete, his vote to uphold the Affordable Care Act in part. People always say he voted to uphold the Affordable Care Act. No. He voted to uphold it in part. He struck down a big part of it, which was the Medicaid part.
Yeah.
His vote on abortion last term, which surprised everybody. He just didn't want to do it in an election year. He didn't want to overturn Roe and Casey in an election year. He's not going to do that. That would kill Republicans. Let's not forget who he is. He's a lifelong Republican, first and foremost. So, no, he's not going to change his mind on these kinds of issues.
Several Democrats have introduced a piece of legislation to add justices to the Supreme Court. The right is flipping out. And also, Joe Biden has apparently impaneled a group of experts to take a look at this. And as a result, you have written a brilliant blog post at Dorf on Law, which everybody should read, linked to in today's show notes. Going back to your argument from a few years back that the court shouldn't be packed, shouldn't be strengthened, it should be weakened. It's already too strong for several reasons, which you have written books about. But the point is, keep it tied, keep it 4-4. You think that's where we should go. You've been vindicated from that once radical idea, and by some pretty serious people. But let's get into this blog post and talk about what the reality of changing the court actually is, because this is now ventures into politics, I suppose. But you don't think there's any possibility that, how would it even be done to add justices to the Supreme Court, which the Constitution doesn't have a say on how many?
No, in fact, the original number was 6, which was an even number. The original number was 6, which was an even number. It was also 10 for a very short time before the Civil War. So let's back up for a second. So 2 political things let's talk about politics for a minute. And when we do this, I normally say to you, I can speculate as a citizen, but it's not my expertise. But now we're talking politics about court reform. This is my wheelhouse. Like this, I can talk. The politics of this, I think I can talk about. So first of all, before these nutty congressmen and 1 senator proposed adding 4 seats to the court, which would bring it to 13, so they could add 4 liberals and make it a liberal majority court. Before that, which is the world's dumbest idea ever, before that happened, Biden made good on a campaign promise to appoint a commission to study Supreme Court reform. In the 2 years leading up to the 2020 election, elite academics published elite articles that were very complicated about how to restaff the court, re-choose the court. Everybody is in favor of ending life tenure, and there are many different ways of dealing with that. Biden wouldn't, this was the right decision. Pete, the progressives came at me like you wouldn't believe when I said Biden should say nothing about the Supreme Court other than I'm going to study it and I'm going to put strong people on the court. Other than that, and that's what he did. That's effectively what he did, and good for him. Unfortunately, now that he's in office, he created, this is going to sound funny to people who haven't heard this. Most people, I'm sure, know this. A 36-person commission, Pete.
I actually didn't know that until I read your blog post. I didn't know that.
36 people. So I have reached out to members of my profession who teach legislation, who teach kind of Congress and teach politics and the executive branch, all of whom tell me that the best way to kill an idea is to get a commission to study it, especially if the commission is more than 6 or 7 people, much less 36. The other thing is, on Twitter, a lot of people have nicely said to me, I don't understand. You've been talking and writing about, Pete, my 2012 book, forget 2016, had all kinds of proposals like the ones being bandied about right now.
Yeah.
Why aren't you on this commission? Well, there's several reasons. One, totally understandable. They're not going to put the guy in the commission who thinks the court isn't a court. So that's fine. But even if that were part of my biography, I've been told by some fairly connected people, because there are, forget Siegel now, there are other law professors, like Dan Epps, who's Garrett Epps' son. You know Garrett Epps probably. Who's his son, who teaches at Washington University, an elite law school. There are people at Chicago. Steve Calabresi, who founded the Federalist Society, has been wanting term limits for 40 years. Why isn't he on it? What I've been told is almost, with one exception, no one on this 36-person commission has actually written about court reform in any serious way. And then one person who did, very not seriously. What I've been told is not about me personally, but in general, they want the people who have written about this to come testify, as opposed to be on the commission. So maybe I'll get a call, maybe I won't. I don't know.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
That's reasonable if you have a 7-person commission. But first of all, these are all elite Harvard Yale type. Well, first of all, almost everybody on this commission went to the Harvard or Yale Law School. Well, now there are seven or eight people who teach at non-Ivy League schools, but they all went to Harvard. And one more point: almost every law professor on this commission is someone who believes in the Supreme Court very strongly. So,
why is it? Let's go back to something you said earlier. Why is it a harebrained, terrible idea to add justices to the court?
Well, okay. So that's the commission. Last Wednesday, 3 members of the House, including Adler, whatever his name is.
Gerald Nadler, my congressman, Mondaire Jones.
You should have stopped him, Pete. You should have asked me. You should have stopped him. I'm just kidding.
No, I retweeted it. I thought it was a good idea.
This is a horrible idea. The 3 members of the House and 1 senator, I believe, want to literally pack the court. So then we talk about, my thing is court balancing and court weakening and court reducing. What they want to do is pack the court so it can make really liberal decisions. All right. First of all, the American people would never go for it politically. Second of all, politicians, of course,
it has some early polling, and it's not very popular, apparently. Right?
No, the American people need, for some reason that I've written about a lot, to have this myth of the Supreme Court being above politics and being something different. So any attempt like that to blatantly stack the court for political reasons is going to be met with all kinds of resistance. But forgetting the political reaction to it, it's a terrible idea, Pete, for 2 reasons. One, the last thing we need is a stronger Supreme Court. And if we have 8 of 14 liberals on the court and they can do all this stuff, that's not a good idea. And even if they did everything I wanted, like, my political agenda, I'm pro-choice, I'm pro-affirmative action, I'm pro-voting rights, I'm pro-campaign finance reform, I'm pro-criminal defendants' rights. Even if they did everything I wanted them to do, when the Supreme Court goes to the left too far, there is a backlash to the right that is much more important to the American people and drowns out the leftists. The Warren Court was a disaster for several reasons, but the biggest one was that it led directly to Ronald Reagan, Federalist Society, Ed Meese, and eventually Donald Trump.
According to you.
If you don't think that Roe versus Wade was a major part of Trump getting elected, then you don't understand why Trump got elected. 1/5 of the people, 20%, actually it's like 24% of the people who voted for him said the Supreme Court was the most important issue. Of those people, almost everyone thinks abortion and guns.
No doubt about it. I mean, I think entry-level politics, as conservative Republicans, there is a litmus test on that one issue, and as there is on the left.
So let me just be I want to clearly state one of the 2 main reasons I want to reduce the power of the Supreme Court, which Pete, is a nonpartisan idea. I've been saying this no matter who was on the court. I said it when we thought that Clinton was going to win. I said it in 2012 when Obama was president.
Yeah, you've been consistent.
This is not partisan on my part. First of all, why would we entrust either Sonia Sotomayor or Sam Alito or name your justice to decide really hard, difficult questions of public policy involving gun reform, affirmative action, campaign finance? They have no expertise. They have no tools. It's not what they study. You, of all people, would appreciate this. We want experts deciding those issues, not lawyers. So that's the first thing. We need to weaken that. No, if we just need to weaken it. They shouldn't be in charge of guns. They shouldn't. That's the first thing. And when they're not in charge of guns directly, because of their jurisprudence, they put lower court judges in charge of guns. So what we have now are different gun rules and different abortion rules all over the country, depending where you live.
Yep.
All right, that's the first thing. The second thing, though, Pete, is there is just, we are too litigious a society. I mean, everybody, we have more lawyers. The only thing we have more percentage of than lawyers are people in prison. And those two things are related, by the way. We just have too many lawyers, too many courts, too many judges, too many things. We need more politics, democracy, grassroots. We need more town halls. We need more of that stuff. All the stuff, by the way, the founding fathers hated. See, the founding fathers didn't want that kind of democracy because they wanted to keep their land from the regulators or whatever. Why? To throw these issues up to Justice Alito, who's a terrible human being, or Justice Ginsburg, who's an American hero and a wonderful human being, but who voted liberal 99.9% of the time. So we know it's not about law, right? I mean, Ginsburg voted liberal almost every important case ever. Is that a coincidence that the law reflects her values? Of course not. It's her values that dictated the law and so on. I can't for the life of me imagine why people want that institution to be stronger.
Well, I think because people don't understand. They haven't heard your argument. Number one, I mean, or it's less about the strength of it and more about the numbers. And I think that's all most people probably pay attention to. How many liberals, how many conservatives, how many Democrats, how many Republicans are on this court or any other court? I mean, they don't think. Yeah. And so your idea of having the court be even 4-4 is not something
6-6.
I think.
Now it's 6-6. But yeah, add 3 seats so it's 6-6.
That's what you think should happen?
Yeah. Add 3 seats and make it 6-6.
Oh, okay, got it. So you think
hold a gun to Manchin's head. Tell me he goes along or else. The other thing they could do, by the way, is they could listen to this, Pete. So people always say to me, "Great idea, Eric. How do you possibly get it done?" I just got an email from a pretty famous law professor before I got on the air with this podcast with you, who said, "I just read your proposal today, and it's interesting, but how would you get from here to there?" It's a great question, and of course, I know we're not going to get from here to there, but a way to do it is for the Senate to vote 51-49, what it would have to be, or 50-49, to abolish the filibuster for court reform. That's all. Don't abolish it for other laws if they want to. I mean, I think it should be abolished, period. But you could just abolish it for court reform. Add 3 seats. Biden signs it. We're 6-6. And this is what Schumer says. Schumer holds a press conference with Biden. And if they had the power to do this, which they probably don't, I mean, if they had the political guts to do this, you might get some Republicans there too, because this is what you say. You say the Supreme Court has been too much of a force in American politics for too long. Our elections should not be decided by who's on the Supreme Court, and our confirmation hearings, everybody agrees, are an embarrassment in front of the whole world. So here's how we change that. From now on, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats. If any law, any state law, any federal law is ever going to be struck down again by the Supreme Court, at least one person has to cross party lines. And that's a good thing. In addition, in 2016, when the court was 4-4, Sam Alito, Elena Kagan, and a bunch of other people said, that was a pretty good year for us because we got to work harder for compromise. We had to make narrower decisions. And then if people get upset about the Republican Democrat thing, which they do, I have in my proposal, there is a way to get independent on the Supreme Court. We've not had an independent person like that for a long time. But if we did, I have a way to get that person on the court. So weaken the court, get more get politics back to politics. However, when the elected branches or the states in that frenzy do something that is clearly unconstitutional, that is clearly wrong, we do it because there's a war going on or we're upset about this or that. We'll get bipartisan consensus. We will. You know why, Pete? Because an evenly divided Supreme Court to have any power has to reach decisions. And guess what? Governmental officials don't give up their power. So this would make them reach consensus. This is exactly what happened in 2006.
How would you change, by the way, the rule around? I mean, you've written and talked for years about all kinds of problems with the Supreme Court, other courts as well. But how would you change lifetime tenure? How would that go about?
So in an ideal world, we'd pass a constitutional amendment. We don't live in that world.
No.
There's a very easy way to do it, and I want to mention three people now. So Steve Calabresi, along with Ed Meese, formed the Federalist Society in 1982, as a conservative response to the Warren Court. This is his proposal. There's a law professor, which I'm going to give you in a minute. There's a law professor at Yale named Akhil Amar, one of the most famous law professors in the country, a progressive liberal. He agrees with this proposal. And then finally, I think the smartest judge I've ever known, Posner, agrees with this proposal. That's three, forget Siegel. You have Calabresi on the right, Amar at the left, Posner in the middle. They all agree. What you could do is pass a statute. So you do need both houses of Congress and the president, of course. But you pass a statute that says from now on, Supreme Court justices will serve on the Supreme Court for 18 years or whatever, but it's 18 years. And then they either can retire and have a salary for life, or they can serve on the Court of Appeals. Now, I'm not in love, which they do anyway, by the way. Justice Souter is still hearing cases on the Court of Appeals from time to time. O'Connor did that before she, unfortunately and sadly and tragically, got Alzheimer's. Justice Stevens did that before he passed away. So, now there are some people who will say to you, no, you need a constitutional amendment to do that. But when Posner, Amar...
You there?
So you don't? You don't.
When Posner, Amar, and what?
Calabresi.
Yeah.
Because the reason I'm picking those three people is one is far right, one is far left,
and
Posner is who knows.
You obviously make a good argument. I wish I could argue against it to make it give people more insight, but
no.
I can't.
Well, the argument against, I'll give you the argument against it because I can do that. The argument against it, which, by the way, Mike Dorff, of all people, who I blog with and you've had on your podcast, Mike has written that this is false. So now you have a Dorff weighing in. The argument is there has to be one Supreme Court, meaning once you're on the Supreme Court, that's your only job. And the Supreme Court has to be one set of 9 people or 6 people or 10 people for all time. So you can't make the judges go sit on the Court of Appeals. The text doesn't say that. I think that's reading too much into it. History doesn't support it. And here's the biggest kicker of them all. Mike said those things. What I'm telling you is if there was political will to enact this statute, that is backed by many people on the left, many people on the right, and many people in the center.
To end lifetime tenure.
To end lifetime tenure by having the justices sit on the lower courts. If you had the political will to do that, we would have the political will to say to the Supreme Court, we don't care what you say about this. Strike it down. We don't care. We're not going to fall. We're not going to listen to you. We don't care. So that kind of, by the way, if I had to predict, I think the result of the Biden commission of 36 people, did I mention it was 36 people? Have you ever heard of such a thing? I'm kidding.
I mean, I don't know. I mean,
no.
I have no idea what makes a good or bad commission of
yes, you do.
Anything.
Ask all your politically connected CNN friends and stuff. 36 is not a number that's doable. But leaving that aside, they may, however, come up with a proposal about life tenure. Because it's so funny, Pete. When I came on your show in your XM Sirius show in 2010, and I was against life tenure, I was literally tilting at windmills. I was in a distinct minority.
Yep.
You were surprised. Most law professors thought I was nuts. Today, it is overwhelmingly popular. And polls just came out last week. So it's like 60, I don't know, some huge number of the American people favor abolishing life tenure. It's a dumb idea. Don't give anybody a job for life.
Yep.
By the way, I have a job for life. And that's like commit a crime or Georgia goes bankrupt. That's a dumb idea. I shouldn't have a job for life. But Pete, I have no power. They have power.
Before we go, I want to ask you about Amy Coney Barrett. She apparently got a book deal for $2 million or something like that.
Okay. So I listened to a sports guy named Dan Lebitard, who's really funny, and I like him. And when they start speculating about things, they have this his father comes in a very heavy accent and says, rank speculation. All right. All I know is I saw a tweet that said she got $2 million for writing a book where she's going to talk about how judges should leave their feelings out of making decisions. I've not confirmed it, Pete, so I don't want to, that's what I read. That's what I read today on Twitter. So let's assume that it's true, but it may not be true, okay, because I haven't confirmed it. So assuming she has gotten a book contract for $2 million and assuming she's going to write about how, I can't even say it out loud without laughing, that judges shouldn't bring their feelings to bear on their cases. It's really interesting. There is a law professor at Vanderbilt Law School named Susanna Sherritt, who by all accounts is very well liked by liberals and conservatives, is very reasonable, unlike me, for example, and is really, what's the word I want to use? Balanced, you know? And she wrote a great piece 2 years ago that got a lot of attention. The problem of the celebrity justice. And she was talking about how Scalia and Ginsburg's careers have changed kind of the way we think about some Supreme Court justices. And then she listed 7 really good reasons why celebrity justices are a really bad idea. They shouldn't be celebrities.
Right.
This is an example of that. Like giving her $2 million to write a book, and if she says that feelings don't come into play or shouldn't come into play, then she's going to be lying, and mistaken, but probably lying. But it does go to what I told you in 2018, I believe it was, when this woman was elevated to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, Posner's old court. I said to you that this is the woman who the right has been wanting to reverse Roe for a very long time.
Right.
And Scalia hired her because as a law clerk from Notre Dame, Notre Dame's a great law school, but it's not top 5, 10. And that's where Supreme Court judges hire their clerks from 95 or something percent of the time. What happened was the dean of Notre Dame, a very good man who's also happens to be Catholic and conservative, called up Scalia and said, hire this woman. She's great. And since that moment, she's been the one
who
they're counting on to reverse Roe and Casey. And she's going to be a celebrity for doing it to the right. She's going to be a hero. She's going to be a hero to the right. And that's what this is about.
And a villain to the rest of most of America.
She's already a villain to me because of what she's written about guns. And she should. You know.
I don't know about that, actually, but I did hear a conversation the other day. Some smart people, they were talking. It was like these Catholic guys, like a progressive Catholic podcast. Really good. I can't think of the name of it right now, but I was listening to it over the weekend. A listener suggested it to me, Bill B in DC, who's also a Catholic, and they were progressive Catholics, and they were kind of talking about how, you know, they realized that Amy Coney Barrett was going to, you know, rule as a staunch conservative, and they didn't expect any changes on things that are the kind of typical culture war issues, especially women's reproductive rights. But they did say, you know, Catholics are sometimes surprising and unpredictable, especially when it comes to corporate rights and so on. And her line of questioning, her answers on the issue of climate change were really telling and certainly disappointing, thinking that any hope they might have held out that she might have been progressive on corporations and their rights was disintegrated at that moment that Kamala Harris asked her, what do you think about the science on tobacco? What do you think about the science on, what was the other one that she asked about? And then,
I don't know, but
COVID. And then she got to climate change. And on this one, Amy Coney Barrett's like, I think that one's not settled. And then you knew exactly where she was going to stand on the rights of corporations as it pertains, obviously, to climate, which is pretty much every corporation when it comes to environment and sustainability.
Well, let's remember several things. Justice Brennan, who's probably one of the most famous liberal Supreme Court justices ever, was Catholic. Justice Kennedy is a devout Catholic and voted and wrote the 4 gay rights opinions ever in Supreme Court history. I have a colleague at work, I've told you this before, who's a very liberal Catholic, who's frankly pro-choice for other people. Like he would not want his wife or daughter to have an abortion. He wouldn't stop them, obviously, but he is pro-choice in the sense that other people get to decide. But that's not Judge Barrett. And I guess I know we're running out of time. I will leave you with this thought. If the reports are true, I can't verify them. If the reports are true, Judge Barrett is a type of Catholic who talks in tongues.
No, come on. I don't know anything about Catholic. I thought that was a Pentecostal thing. I've never even heard of a Catholic doing that.
No, because
don't cast aspersions on this woman.
She belongs to an ultra-conservative, small Catholic sect. And they don't, so there's no debate that the sect that people have said she belongs to and that we know her husband does talks in tongues.
What's it called?
The only debate.
Is it that praise?
Some people, yes, people for praise or praise for people or people praising or whatever it is. but Pete, look, all religions have very bizarre customs. I don't identify as Jewish, but I was raised Jewish.
People of praise.
Yeah, and all religions have customs that are, we find strange and all that stuff.
Mm.
But you're not going to find many members of ultra-conservative, ultra-religious Catholic sects that speak in tongues that are going to believe in the kind of things that 21st century America should believe in. She is potential. Now, the Supreme Court changes people. We know this. Some people, didn't change Thomas at all, but it didn't change Ginsburg at all. Not 1 inch. But it does change people. There's always the hope that when because she's never had this kind of power before, there's always the hope that when people get this power, they move to the center a little bit from wherever it is they were. However, so let's hope that. I'm going to say that's possible. It's always possible. Her sect talks in tongues.
Well, I'm going to look into that accusation. Revealed ex-members of Amy Coney Barrett's faith tell of trauma and sexual abuse.
She told us everything we needed to know about her. Everything, really, pretty much. When she dissented in a gun case, where she said the state had no right to say that people convicted of felonies can't be barred from guns for life.
Why? What's wrong with that?
Because if you commit a felony and a state wants to bar you from having a gun, they should be allowed to do so. There's no text, history, or public policy reason why that would not be true. In other words, what she said was you can only be banned from having a gun if you committed a violent felony. Okay, maybe that's a better rule. I'm not defending which rule is better as a matter of public policy. There is no chance there is anything in the history of our Constitution, in the text of the Constitution, in anything revolving around constitutional law that suggests Amy Barrett gets to decide whether the rule is you commit a felony and you lose right to gun for life, or you commit a violent felony and you lose your right to gun for life. There's nothing that, for her to think she has the authority to make that decision, really bad.
Eric Siegel.
Gun law. Do you know how many? Sorry,
go ahead.
Do you know how many gun laws there were in 1788? Like Boston didn't let you carry guns in public. Philadelphia wouldn't let you carry guns in pubs. There were so many gun laws. You can't even get there as an originalist.
The most extreme idea, and I forget where I read this, but it was just maybe struck down or whatever, about guns. The most extreme one, I think, maybe you have a different example in terms of some special type of gun, but the one that would be most applicable, like the idea that you can't have a machine gun is generally pretty well, we don't argue about that, and the gun people argue about what makes a machine gun and so on and so forth, but the bottom line is that they're kind of hard to get. But the most extreme law is that you can own a handgun and not need any kind of permitting for it.
Texas is about to pass that law.
Is that where I read it? You don't need a permit, or you have to have a.
So my favorite exchange on Twitter over the last 6 months has been with our friend Professor Jonathan Adler at Case Western. Mm-hmm. Listeners to your pod will recognize that name because he and I fight all the time. Where he took the position that every person who buys a gun in America must have a background check. To which I responded, that's false, because in Georgia alone, forgetting 49.
Oh, he was arguing that not that's the way it should be. He's arguing that's the way it is.
No, he was arguing that's the way it is. Yes, and we all know that's not true because you can buy guns at gun shows. If you're a licensed dealer, licensed by state or federal governments, then you, I think, have to have a background check. But many guns are purchased at gun shows, not through licensed dealers, and no background checks are done. Anyway, but Texas wants to go even further and say even if you go to a store, a licensed store, to buy a handgun, just give it to you. Here's $50. Give me a handgun. It's unbelievable, people. I mean, it's
the governor of Texas, who is soon going to be Matthew McConaughey. I don't know if you've heard about it. He's polling very well. Is that he once tweeted, I'll never forget this, the governor Abbott there, that something about we should be embarrassed by our low gun owning or gun purchasing numbers. We should be embarrassed.
Because 300 million guns isn't enough.
But listen, like, reasonable people can agree or disagree, but being embarrassed that someone doesn't own a gun is, I don't know how to, I don't know how.
Did you hear that bang?
What was it?
It was Sweeney trying to get into my room.
Oh, your dogs are the best. I usually don't like when you tweet about your dogs or basketball.
Really?
Yeah, because you want what you want from people, you know? Like, I try to stay in my lane.
I may
comedy,
know as much
culture,
about the NBA
politics, life.
Hold on a second, buddy.
These people, these people with the tweeting about sports, you're one of them.
I know a lot about the NBA. I'm an expert on the NBA.
Who cares?
Well,
it's you and
NBA?
Wajid Ali tweeting about the NBA. Who? That's not why I follow you. I don't care. It's not why I follow you.
Sweeney is literally trying to.
And when you tweet about your dogs, I also don't care. But you tweeted a video the other day that I did care. I did care about it. I liked it a lot. And it was your wife Lynn trying to get one dog to give her a kiss, wouldn't, and the other dog came over and did it. That was great. That was a fine moment, and I appreciated it. But
how about my kids? Am I allowed to?
I like when you tweet pictures with your kids with your dogs. Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. And now I'm feeling bad because I do feel like a lot of your tweets about your dogs do make me feel better about my love for my dog and just happy in general. So let me just stick to my criticism. Just stop tweeting about basketball.
You don't have.
Yeah, you do have a dog. What are you talking about?
I wrote a whole thing in Huffington Post about basketball.
Who cares? Wait, you just accused me of not having a dog.
You have like a hot dog or something. You have like
no, we have a dog.
You have a tiny dog.
It's a dog.
Not really.
Not really?
You
have guinea pigs.
This. You should interview my.
I mean,
I don't. Wait a minute.
If you want to do this, let's do this. You have guinea pigs.
We have guinea pig races.
You just said that on a recorded thing that I'm going to share with everybody.
But I don't. We have guinea pigs because I love. We have guinea pigs for the same reason I recycle, because I believe in marriage. Sorry, I'm kidding.
Oh God!
No, I'm kidding.
Really?
That was a joke. That used to be a line. It's now a joke. Your small runt of a dog is fine, but Pete, come on.
Thank you. Not fine. I mean, you can say things like that, but just to be clear, it is a dog, and it acts like a dog.
It's a dog in the sense that the court is a court.
Thank you very much, as always. I love you.
Bye.
That was great. Always great. Love talking to Eric Siegel. Go give him a follow on Twitter if you haven't already, at @eSpinSiegel, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Now I have another guest that I'm very excited to have joining me. I think he is joining me for the first time here on the podcast. He and I had a great talk shortly after I lost my job. He reached out to me, and we had a great conversation. My gig at Sirius, that is. And I've known him for pretty much my entire career as a comedian, because when I was starting out, he was one of the big name guys. He's got a new comedy album out. It's his fifth. It's called Gay Jokes for Straight Cruisers, and it's currently #1 on the iTunes comedy charts. He's been seen on Comedy Central Presents, ABC's The View, Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn, and so many more shows. He's done everything you can do in comedy, and his comic novel, You'll Be Swell, is available on Amazon. He's such a talented guy. I had a great conversation with Jim David, and you can follow him on Twitter at Actual Jim David. Go buy his comedy album, and here we go. There he is. Ladies and gentlemen, the legend himself. I've just told you all about him. Jim David. Congratulations on being #1 on the charts. Did you ever think?
No, I mean, I didn't. Are you kidding me? I thought I would. I hope to just chart. In fact, when we debuted on Friday on iTunes, it was number 47, and I went, oh, I'm number 47 out of 200. Well, that's not bad. Better than being 180. And then within about 30 minutes, it was number 5. And then I woke up Saturday morning and it was #1, where it has remained.
Well, congratulations. Thank
you. It's unbelievable.
I just bought and listened to the entire thing while I was doing my chores, and I stopped and laughed out loud alone many times. And I hope that everybody will go buy it and support you in your comedy.
Thank you.
And you have been around for a long time. You're one of the veterans. You're one of the elder statesmen, and I'm not making age jokes. You're Obi-Wan Kenobi of comedy. You're up there with very few others. You know everybody. You've done everything, and you've had tremendous success.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been doing comedy since 1986, and it all stopped last March. And that's the funniest thing about this album, is because what I did last March was March 1 through 13. I performed on a transatlantic cruise between Florida and Spain, and it was a 9-day cruise where for 7 days people couldn't get off the ship. And so I would make jokes about the pandemic and you guys are crazy, or you're either brave or you're out of your minds being on this ship. But anyway, never mind that. And the rest of it is my regular act and not too much pandemic stuff. Because remember, this is just at the beginning and people were like, well, this is not going to be that big a deal. Nobody knew about it.
Yeah.
And
I was surprised to hear the way that the album opened, because you were on a cruise during the pandemic, granted the very, very beginning. Yeah. But it gave you something to talk about, and it was very interesting. And of course you've been performing on cruise ships for a while, but I was surprised as to kind of how politically you were able to get and how much you got away with on the cruise, because I've never performed on cruises. I've been on one, but I always thought you had to be like really kind of middle of the ground in terms of politics, and you couldn't say, but I mean, certainly you leave it all right there.
I get in a lot of trouble.
You do. You get reported out. You get written up.
I get reported on. Yes. This is during the Trump years. Especially, I got reported on during the Bush years, and people got mad at me in Vegas. I remember right at the beginning of the Iraq War in 2000, whenever that is, 3. And I was doing a joke about how George Bush was jumping up and down, and he was going, "Daddy had a war. I want a war." Something like that. I can't remember the whole routine.
That's good.
But after the show, this man came up to me and he said that he was in the military and he was about to be deployed overseas, and he found my routine very disturbing. And, do I think it's like a joke that, he's going to, and I said, no, I was just making a joke about the president and his whole desire to go to war. And I'm not making a joke about your military service. But anyway, people take it very personally. But during the Trump years, that was cultish behavior from his followers.
Sure. Still is.
I would make one joke about Trump. I think the first joke I did about Trump was, I look at Donald Trump and I think I owe Sarah Palin an apology. That was the joke. And I don't get too adamant about it, because I could have gone on for 20 minutes about Trump, but I only 3 or 4 jokes. 3, 4 or 5 jokes is more than enough. You get the point.
Yeah.
Of where I'm coming from. But people would complain about that. People would complain about, and that whole story I tell at the beginning about how I've met Trump twice and I'm already on his ship list.
It's so funny. Yeah.
Well, but I would just, that's just the truth. It's the truth of what I said to him and what he said to me. And, then people would get up and leave because they thought I was trashing him based on what he said. It's like I repeated verbatim what he said, and then they thought that was me editorializing.
I want to come back to your thoughts on the whole Trump era. I haven't talked to you in a long time, and get your thoughts on that. But I want to also introduce my audience to your life and myself to some extent. I know a good bit about you. We've known each other a long time, but when I was starting out as a comedian, you were, one of the premier guys at all of the clubs in the city, and I just wanted to grow up to be mostly like you. And so I wanted to, you've lived a fascinating life. You've had a wonderful career, but you grew up in a kind of an interesting way in terms of who you grew up with, where you grew up, and how you ended up, Jim David. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina, where my 90-something parents still reside.
Wow.
They're still alive. And then I went to college and I was a drama major. And then I came to New York to be in theater. And one of my early jokes was the theater said, "We don't really see you as an actor. We see you as an usher." And so I tried to be a working actor for the first 10 years I was in New York and just nothing was happening. You know what I mean? I didn't, and it was because I didn't know who, I had a lot of survival jobs. I was a waiter for years. I did singing telegrams dressed as a chicken or a pink gorilla.
Really?
I did that for about 3 years because I had to be free to audition for the auditions that never came in. And I sold office supplies over the telephone. And then I got a job teaching high school drama out on Long Island and directing high school plays.
That's great.
Because, I was a theater directing and acting major in college and in grad school. And so I was the theater. And I directed a bunch of high school plays, which were really good productions, especially for teenagers, and I'm still in contact with those kids to this day. We're all friends on Facebook and we keep in contact. And they were all only like 11 years younger than me.
Sure.
But they were teens.
How long did you teach, and at what point?
About 3 years.
Why did you stop?
Well, what happened was I always wanted to do comedy, but I never had the nerve. I just was like, so what I did was I went to the Catch Rising Star open mic. Anybody could go. You could just go, you got a number, and you went on that night. Well, I went on, and I was completely unprepared. I didn't have anything to say. And I went on, and I told a dumb joke about a duck, and I tap danced, and I did these stupid, it was just ridiculous. And then when I walked, and I said, "Thank you, everybody," no applause. Nothing. The audience looked at me like I had just bent over and spread my butt cheeks. They just went, it was just a horrifying experience. And so I never went back on. And this was like 1981 or 82. And then in 1986, but see, because also the thing with comedy is, it takes us about 10 years, wouldn't you say, Pete, to find your voice on stage?
I got it in the first 6 weeks.
Okay, well, that's because you're Pete Dominic.
No, I actually don't think I ever really found I never think I found like a signature voice. But yeah, if you know, whatever your brand is, I've always Mr. Improv. Whatever happens, happens.
Yeah. But anyway, I never knew what my voice. It's like, who am I up there? Am I Rodney Dangerfield? Am I Jackie Mason? Am I Woody Allen? It's like, what kind of a character? I felt like Phyllis Diller was one of my comedy idols when I was growing up, and she was a crazy housewife with a cigarette holder. And I thought, well, what can I do? Do I have to go up there in a smoking jacket and a cravat with a pipe? I don't know what to do. And then I saw Roseanne, her 1986 debut on The Tonight Show. And she just came out and talked about her and her husband and her kids. And the way that she did it was so real to me. She comes out and she says, "My husband said I need more space, so I locked him outside." Just because I was a fan of one-liners. And so she did those so well. And I went, oh, I can be Jim up there. I don't have to be that Jim. I can be me, and I can just talk about my family, and I can tell the truth maybe. And so then I wrote like 20 minutes of material just about my family with jokes. And I would take old National Enquirer newspapers and read the bad headlines and just crazy stuff. But I did stuff that I thought was funny to me. Mm-hmm. And I went to an open mic, which was at the Lotus Room, which was a combination cabaret and Thai restaurant around the corner from Port Authority. It's not there anymore. But at that open mic was Judy Gold. And that was one of her first nights doing comedy. That's where I met Judy. And I did my routine, and it went great. The people there really laughed. And then they invited me back, and then they invited me back again and again. And then I ended up opening for a singer. And then before I knew it, I had like 20 minutes of material. So I went and auditioned at Comedy U, which was on Grand Street between, like next to, it was at Grand Street and West Broadway. And that was a great little club. It was Judy Gold and Mario Cantone and Joy Behar and me and Ray Romano. That's who we started out with there. And then I went to Comic Strip, and then I went to Catch a Rising Star, and then I went to Dangerfields, and then Stand Up New York, and then that was it. And so I was working, and within within about 8 months after my first open mic there, I was making my living.
Wow.
And so it happened pretty quick.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
And then I started being a road comic, and I would do, road gigs all over the country, first as an MC, the whole trajectory, MC, middle, and then headliner.
What was your childhood like?
Oh, it was pretty fun once I got involved in children's theater. My parents pretty much figured out that I was not athletic and I wasn't going to be a jock and I wasn't going to play ball or do anything. My father's a golfer, and he tried to get me to play golf, and he would tear his hair out because I would hit the ball and it would go behind me. It was just ridiculous. But once I got involved in children's theater, where I was in 2 or 3 plays every day after school, it was a pretty good childhood. And I had a lot of fun, and I had a lot of friends, and my parents were in community theater too, so they got it.
Do you have siblings?
I have 2 sisters. Yeah. But my parents were in community theater. My father was a local leading man. He was King Arthur in Camelot, and he was Curly in Oklahoma, and he did all these musical theater leading roles. And so he was a star, a local star.
Were you guys religious?
They're Christians. They're Methodists. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What is Methodist?
Methodist is Protestant. It's around the corner from Baptist and Presbyterian.
What does it mean, I guess, is what I meant. Like, what are the generalizations? I feel like the Methodists are very, peaceful in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
they don't get angry. They're like Canadians.
Right. This was long before the Protestant church became evangelical and got political. Going to church was a rather pleasant experience because you just listened to the preacher's sermon, and it was all about living your best life. And loving your neighbor and your family and all of that, and using scripture as a basis for that. There was no politics. None of that came into it. So that's a real shame, because the church has now, there's a reason why less than 50% of Americans call themselves churchgoers, is because the evangelical Christians have thrown them out by getting, one of the jokes on my CD, you heard it, is, all the things I have to say instead of the real thing. Like, instead of saying fraud, I have to say TV evangelist. And instead of saying mentally retarded, I have to say Christian Trump supporter. And instead of saying pervert, I have to say Penn State coach.
Yeah.
So it's like, these are the things you can't say. But but when I went to church, it was fine. I saw all the good things that the church can do as far as community.
Yeah.
And my parents had lifelong friends. They've outlived all of their friends now. They're in their 90s, and most of their friends are gone. But most of their friends were from that church.
Were you close? Were you close with your dad?
Oh yeah, I talked to him every day.
Your whole life, you've been tight with your dad.
The whole time.
It says my notes say here that you identify as a gay man.
Yeah, I am. I don't identify. I am. Yeah.
When did you know?
When I was about 12 or 13. Yeah.
How?
Huh?
Everybody has their story.
Because my parents sent me to a Catholic school in the 7th grade because they thought the public school was going down as far as education goes. Mm-hmm. They sent me to an all-boys Catholic private school where you had to wear a coat and tie every day. And I ended up hooking up with one of the guys in my class. So,
but are there feelings? Like, I remember, like, when I was really little, when I first felt like I was really into girls. I was sitting in this girl's lap who was the same age as me. And I remember feeling, I want to do that more. Did you have early signs and signals, and then how did you feel did you feel weird about it, or because nobody?
I felt great. No, I thought this is great as long as nobody finds out.
When did people when did you start telling people?
When I got out of college.
Oh, really? Did your parents know?
Not until I met my husband.
Wow. And
I didn't tell them until I met my husband 33 years ago. Because I didn't tell them because I didn't have anybody to tell them about. And when, I met my husband in 1988. And so this was when AIDS was raging the country. And if I had told my parents then, they would have been worried. You know what I mean? They would have said, "Oh, you're going to catch it," and blah blah blah. So I didn't want to put up with that. So I said, until I made a deal with myself, I said, when I finally have a partner that I'm serious about, then I'll tell them, because then I'm going to want them to meet him.
It seems like you've always been like pretty confident and comfortable about who you are in every way as a comedian.
Not in every way. No, I've always wanted to be an underwear model. I never accepted the fact that I was a funny guy. I always wanted to be one of those hot guys that walks into a room and everybody goes, "Who's that?"
Huh.
You know, so that's a big hole in my confidence. I absolutely despise having my picture made.
Oh, really?
I can't stand it. I just had for this album, I had publicity shots made. You know, he took like 500 shots. I picked 3.
I used to do a joke about, not in my stand-up act, but just about if you get 1,000, shots to choose from, and you can't find any that you like, you're just not nearly as good looking as you think you are.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, other than,
really
that's
wrong.
not a terrible thing to say. I'm not like the stud in the room or leading man quality or something like that. I mean, but that if that is the hardest thing, I suppose, I don't know how that's manifested in your life, but
I keep seeing this in the frame. This is on the picture. It makes me look like alfalfa, because it's got
you're pointing now to your head and
up to that
and
right
a picture
there.
frame.
Yeah, it's because it makes my hair. Anyway, okay, that's okay.
I think you look fantastic. I like the frame.
Okay. So no, I mean, I never had any problem with being gay at all, to answer your question. I said, well, this is how I feel, and this feels completely natural, and so let's pursue this.
When did you start? I feel like when I first started watching you, you certainly didn't hide it, but you weren't overt, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I
never talked about it.
You didn't really.
I just, for the first 14 years of doing stand-up, I did not bring it up on stage.
For any specific reasons?
I thought it'd be the end of my career. I thought people would throw things at me, which they eventually did. One night at the comic strip, a guy in the audience picked up the ashtray and threw it at me, and it shattered on the back wall.
But that had nothing to do with your sexuality and everything to do with your act.
Sure it did. No.
What happened?
He hated it. No, I told some gay joke, I can't remember, and it was insulting to straight people. And it was, I can't remember the joke. But
you used to have one of the greatest, opening kind of audience jokes. I used to think, this is when I first was like, God, he's so good, is when you'd see a young, good-looking guy in the audience, you'd say, boy, I'm old enough to be your father, if that's what you want. Something like that.
I said, I could be your daddy if that's what you want. Yes.
I used to just die laughing because it was subtle, and it would take a moment. It would get this long laugh, and that was one of the first times I ever realized that technique in comedy, and the fact that you would do it up front was kind of a way of letting people know, and then you just had their permission and you just won them. I just love that when you would do that. Mm-hmm. I found you built such trust with the audience.
Well, no, when I finally came out and on stage in 1998, I remember it very well. It was at the Comedy Cellar, and I just started talking about my partner, and I just made some jokes about him, and this sky did not fall, and nobody threw anything, and they laughed, and I went, oh, okay. And I remember the MC. I don't remember who the MC was, but he said, well, Jim, did you just come out on stage? And I said, yeah, I did.
It was Rick Chrome, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't Rick.
I know.
It was somebody else. I can't remember who.
How that must have been a pretty crazy, interesting night. How did that change when you would go on the road? To be in New York City and talk about things is one issue and get a reaction, but doing comedy across the country, we all know. You might pick and choose your material differently. You might say this or that differently. How did that? Did you change at all? Were you more subtle when you would be in Cincinnati?
I distinctly remember it, and I hope this is accurate as far as my memory goes. But I didn't start talking about it on the road until my Comedy Central special, because I came out to world my comedies. This is in 2000, Pete. And I did my Comedy Central special, and I did the material about my partner. And, when I did, one of my earliest jokes was, my father said to me, son, what is it that the two of you do? What do you do? And I said, well, Dad, all those things you really wish Mom would do, but she won't. That's what we do. That was one of my first jokes. And I remember I did that. But I did that on Comedy Central. And so they informed me, I didn't know that this was the case, but they informed me that I was the first openly gay man to have a Comedy Central special. So that was, and I got a little blurb about that in the Advocate magazine, which was a gay magazine. People magazine was not interested. Time, Newsweek, none of them were interested. It's like, this is a groundbreaking thing that's just happened and nobody cares. Now, when the fucking Bachelor comes out or anybody comes out, they're like, so-and-so comes out, and so-and-so obscure actor from soap opera comes out. And you're like, oh, but I couldn't get any publicity. Back then, nobody was interested.
What did you make, by the way? What did you make about that story last week when the Bachelor came out? And did you see the clip of Billy Eichner asking him while he was still on that show and in the closet?
Yeah.
I mean, that made me sad.
It's incredibly annoying to me that guy, who I'd never heard of, by the way.
Yeah.
That guy gets a sit down on ABC News with Robin Roberts. And I'm like, he's come to tell this monumental thing, which nobody cares. I saw it on a blog, you know what I mean? And I was like, what? Who cares? The Bachelor. Well, I mean, I guess there's interest in that. When he was a bachelor, he was advertised as a Christian virgin. Right. I suppose there's interest in that regard, but he could have done it in some magazine article or something. He didn't have to go on TV and sit there because it becomes this whole Sturm and Drang. And that's why I love people like Adam Rippon, the ice skater, because he just goes to the Olympics and he says, yeah, I'm gay. And then, he lets the reporters ask him the questions, but he doesn't bring it up, so I like that approach.
We've been hearing a lot about, you mentioned that you met your husband in the late 80s at the height of the AIDS epidemic. And lately people have been talking a lot about looking back at that as a result of just thinking about the virus, thinking about Dr. Fauci and what his role, apparently he did good work, back then and, on AIDS and then just, talking about Ronald Reagan. I find a lot of gay people of a certain age really hate Ronald Reagan. And I started to learn the history about what he did or really didn't do during the height of the AIDS epidemic. And I guess the statistics that I read something about how many more lives would have been saved had he taken it seriously and dealt with it. And that was really
He did not mention the word AIDS publicly until 25,000 people had died of it. And then once he finally mentioned it, he didn't talk about prevention. He talked a lot about testing and finding the people who have it. But he didn't talk about prevention. He didn't, because they couldn't, the Reagan administration, they couldn't talk about gay sex. The whole concept of it was horrifying to them. And they would giggle about it. Larry Speaks, his press secretary, or I think that's his name, would giggle. Like a reporter in the briefing room was, does the president plan to address the AIDS crisis? And you could hear, disgusting, so, and some people have actually asked me about the comparisons between AIDS and COVID. COVID is worse because you couldn't get AIDS by breathing on somebody. But AIDS was worse because there was a disgrace having AIDS. People would get fired for it. People would get thrown out of their families for it. And if you had AIDS, you were a bad person for a while. You know what I mean? You went and did something and you put something in your body in a place that it shouldn't have been put. So that's
where do you think we're at today, on when it comes to sexual orientation, LGBT equality?
I think we're better than we've ever been. I mean, I can get married. I did 8 years ago. People are not, except for the most conservative religious, people are not, people are keeping their gay children in their houses. Their parents are openly embracing their transgender kids, which is a Huge deal.
By keeping, you mean keeping their gay children? You mean they're not kicking their kids out of their house, out of their family because
that's right. They used to do that.
Mm.
I mean, a friend of mine, when he came out to his parents, this is in the 90s, his father went over and opened the door and said, "Well, you come back when you've got this gay stuff out of your system, but you're not going to be gay under this roof." Stuff like that.
Do you ever worry about having your rights, hard fought rights that you've won over your years rolled back?
They're trying to, but I'm not that worried, right? Because they're a minority, and that would be the tyranny of the minority if that were to happen. I mean, when you've got 70% of the country who approves of marriage equality, I'm not too concerned.
Where do you think? How do you see where we're at, and with a wider lens in terms of all the issues? Because I think comedians always have a great insight because you're constantly traveling around the country. In your case, when you're on cruise ships as well, you're internationally. You're talking to people from all over the world. On your new album, you have a lot of people in the audience from Europe, and so you have a great, obviously, take on all these things. And it's really disconcerting, frightening about what's happening in our country right now after certainly the last 4 years of Trump, but with social media, with these conspiracy theories, and obviously the pandemic. How do you see the way things are in 2021, and given your long, exciting life, Jim David?
It's a mess. I think that we're in a mess right now, an absolute clusterfuck. And the reason is because of 4 years of the worst presidents in American history who stirred up the most lunatic fringe, dumb redneck sack of shit idiots out there. And I'm not gonna mince words with these people. If you are still a Trump supporter, there is something wrong with you. That's it. Trump is a racist, a rapist, a sexual assaulter, a pathological liar, a con man, a tyrant, a fascist, a crook, and just keep on going down the line as to this he is the worst thing to ever happen to the country politically. And he opened up the Pandora's box of white supremacy and bigotry and stupidity. And those people are not going to be easily put back into the box. And I think that they're in the minority, and that's what they're flipping out about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that analysis is right on. Do you have any Trump supporters in your life?
No, nobody in my family, and none of them in my life. Nope.
What do you do when you come across them? There's a lot of comics who are Trump supporters. How do you get along with folks when that issue comes up, if it comes up?
I had much experience when the issue came up. I remember there was one comic who said, "Oh, no, I support Trump." And I said, "Well, then there's something wrong with you." I looked him right in the face and I said, "Then there's something wrong with you. Sorry. That's it. No, you can't." I mean, I wouldn't have said that if he said he was a Republican. And I wouldn't have said that if he supported Ted Cruz. Well, maybe, but I mean, I think that support for Trump is linked to a deep pathology. There's something wrong because these people resent the fact that white Christians are no longer the dominant ruling class. And they're clinging onto that with their dear lives. And, I'm glad that all these people from the insurrection are being arrested. I think it's only a matter of time before the Proud Boys is declared a domestic terror organization, which is what they are. This is insanity, what's going on. And I mean, what horrified me about the most horrifying thing to me, other than the insurrection, was Charlottesville. Was like, what? This is 2020. What year was this? 2019 or
that
whatever?
Was 17.
17, yeah. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Mm-hmm. Walking with tiki torches, going, Jews will not replace us. What is your end game here? What do you hope to accomplish? Are you going to get rid of the Jews? No, you're not. This is not going to happen. And so what is your ultimate goal here? Why are you doing this? You know what I mean? And I think that there is. Let me just finish. There's a revolt from the other side as far as Black Lives Matter. Because it's like after all of these years, and I'm going to find the result of the Derek Chauvin trial very interesting. There's after all of these years, there's there's a revolt where a lot of minorities and underrepresented people are saying, no, we're here too. And it's not like we want to rule. We want to share power, and we want to have a place at the table. That's why it was so crazy when Trump picked all of his cabinet, except for Ben Carson. They were all white, and most of them were evangelicals.
Elaine Chao.
Oh, that's right. Elaine
Mitch
Chao.
McConnell's wife.
Well, yeah, there you go. That's not too much of a stretch. You didn't have to go too far out of the neighborhood for that one.
So a lot of people, certainly on the right, and a lot of comedians that we know are really concerned with issues regarding speech, and they talk about something they call cancel culture. And I wonder what your take is on that. If you feel like you've had to make changes that you haven't wanted to in terms of how you talk or what you say on stage or in an interview like this, how concerned are you with that issue about the way that we have to be more careful and stay woke and be on a continued evolutionary path?
Oh, please. I mean, I just think that people need, you heard on my album, I do a disclaimer, about how if you're offended, I don't give a shit. People need to lighten up. And I'm not going to say anything that is meant to hurt you. I think that if somebody comes out and makes a joke that some people may consider sexist or racist, then they can take it on a case-by-case basis. But I don't believe in canceling people. You know what I mean? It's like all of a sudden, I didn't believe in canceling Kevin Spacey. It's like all of a sudden, he was accused of this, and then he came out and said, well, I'm sorry if he felt that way.
That it didn't bother you. It didn't bother you that he blamed his issues on being gay or something like that, or that he came out.
I don't remember what exactly happened, but I don't think it's fair to end somebody's career based on just that. I don't know.
His issues. He's a bad example because I think he may have done some things with done things with underage people. But but I also think that we. And I should have said this, should separate the conversation when we're talking about certain types of people versus other types of people. Certainly if a comedian says something on stage that's clearly meant to be a joke, that's different than, say, a teacher, a principal, or a politician who has a different responsibility and expectation in terms of how they talk and how they think. And I think people can't sometimes hold those two ideas in their head at once.
There are certain things that are not acceptable in public discourse anymore, such as openly using the N-word in a nasty way, openly using the F-word as in faggot. Those words should not be in speech anymore, unless it's a good joke. I maintain that you can still do a good joke with those words. But I think it's gone too overboard. I think that and I don't want to give the right wing any ammunition. And the whole woke cancel culture thing gives them a lot of admission. See, they're trying to silence us. No, I'm just trying to point out that what you say is an idiot. Have you seen that 6-panel cartoon that explains freedom of speech?
No,
and
I don't think so.
Well, it says freedom of speech in the Constitution means that the government cannot regulate what you say.
Right.
And the government can't say. But a private company, if they don't like what you say, they're saying, we think you're an asshole and we're showing you the door and we don't want to work with you anymore. That's fine. You know what I mean? That's when a private company says, we don't want you around here anymore with that kind of language.
I love the MyPillow guy came out with a new social media platform, apparently, that is about celebrating speech, but you can't take the Lord's name in vain.
You can't, and you can't curse.
Oh, really?
Right. You cannot use profanity because it's a Christian site.
I think that
he's out of his mind.
Yeah, that guy is something.
He's out of his mind, Mike Lindell.
Yeah.
That's just craziness.
I think that something that you, on your new special, you mentioned, you talk a little bit about, there's some foreigners in the audience, and you go right to the issue of healthcare. And I think now that you just told me before I hit record, you just had surgery on your foot. And I think that most comedians, most freelance artists in America have strong opinions about health insurance because we really fall into a gap, specifically stand-up comics. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on it. And because this isn't actually a really important issue, like the top issue, healthcare, jobs, and education really, generally speaking, should be the things that I feel like we should argue more about than some of these, culture war bullshit issues that aren't really that big of a deal.
Oh yeah, those things don't matter.
I mean, I'm not going to say whatever your journey is. I'm happy to hear what your problems and your struggle is, but I mean, come on, the things that we should really be arguing about are education, healthcare, and job opportunities. But what has been your experience with health insurance? How have you been able to stay healthy and pay for any, when you need care?
I've been on my husband's health insurance from work. I've been his spouse on his health insurance, so I've been taken care of. Now, if I was single, I'd have to pay my own health insurance, would be like $700 a month, which would be very expensive.
But that's only as a result of laws changing that you can benefit from your husband. I mean, that wasn't always the case being a gay man. I mean, that was one of the freedoms that gay people didn't have. Then
they got it. Yeah. When they legalized domestic partnerships in New York, companies started to insure the domestic partners of their employees. Yeah. Because they saw that it was good business. But I just think, as far as that health thing goes, I don't have a huge opinion about it, because there's a lot about it I don't understand. But it seems to me that the United States is 30-something in the world in healthcare, behind Slovakia. You know what I mean? I don't know what it is now, but I mean, it's like Canada has universal healthcare. All of Europe does. All of Scandinavia does. Brazil, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what countries, but there's so many countries that Cuba does. I mean, if you go to the doctor in Cuba, you don't have to pay anything. So I just think I just kind of think it's crazy that Americans don't have that. Now, I just had a $25,000 operation, and if I didn't have insurance, I would be completely screwed. They would charge me for it, and I don't have, and I just think.
By the way, that you showed me your foot, and by the way it's wrapped up, it looks like you don't have insurance. It looks like you did that yourself.
Looks like Civil War.
It looks like a Civil War bandage.
Right, exactly. Well, it's just a huge. I had reconstructive foot surgery, so my foot was very swollen. So he had to make sure that my foot is immobile. I can't move my foot at all.
What is the key to a successful marriage? And is there anything different if you're a gay man or woman or straight?
If you cheat on him, don't let him know.
That's true of all sexual orientations?
Yeah, no. I mean, in our case, we're lucky. We've just gotten along. We just like each other, and we respect each other's space. And he likes the opera. I'm not a big fan. I like stupid science fiction and Game of Thrones and sex and violence, and he's not into that. He's into Downton Abbey, and anything with Judi Dench and Maggie Smith. He's fine.
He sounds much more sophisticated than you, in general.
Not so much. I wouldn't give him that much credit.
At least with his preferences in the arts.
Yeah. Well, no, he'll sit and listen to the Barber of Seville and Ida Mineo on a Saturday afternoon while I'm, I've got, 80s music on. So my tastes are a little more lowbrow.
All right, before we go,
we've just gotten along.
Before we go, I always like to ask people who have been in show business for as long as you have for a great showbiz story. You must have a million, being that you came up with so many very, very famous comedians. And is there anybody or anything that ever happened? Like, I can't believe that night, that day, that experience ever happened in my life.
I'll tell you the first thing that just came to my head. One of my when I was growing up, my 4 comedy albums, comedy idols were Phyllis Diller, Rodney Dangerfield, Lily Tomlin, and Jonathan Winters. Those are my 4 idols. And I had, of course, never met any of them. And then one night I was working, this is in the 90s, and I was working at Dangerfield's on a Saturday night. And in East 51st and First Avenue.
61st.
61st. Okay, yeah. May it rest in peace. It closed during the pandemic. Yeah. But anyway, it was one of those rare nights at Dangerfields where everything was clicking. You know, the audience was great. I was killing. Everything was great. And I walked out into the lobby, and there's Rodney Dangerfield. And he comes up to me and he says, "What's your name?" And I said, "Jim David." And he goes, "Oh, you're very funny. I seen you in there getting big laughs," and then walked away. And that's all he said. And I just thought, okay, I guess I can die. You know, how cool was that?
That's amazing. That's
it's great.
Yeah, there are these moments in your career where you feel like you deserve it. You've arrived. They're not.
I did this cruise last year in March, which was like the last transatlantic cruise, you know, from Florida to Spain. And while I was on that cruise, I recorded all of my sets. You know, I just take a little a high quality digital recorder on the stage, put it on the table, and record the set. And it sounds really good, right? It's CD quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does sound great.
But anyway, when I flew home on March the 13th, which was one day before the shit hit the fan at the airports, and then on the 15th we were locked down, and then all of a sudden with the sudden shock of all my gigs getting canceled, and I was suddenly unemployed, and you know, I had no work, and there was a disease, and I had to stay home. I couldn't go out. I forgot about those recordings. Totally forgot about it. And then in November, I got a gig at this Club Med in the Dominican Republic, which was a COVID-safe Club Med where we were all tested before we got there, and we were rapid tested when we got to the resort. And so I said, well, of course, this is a travel company that I've performed with for years. And I went, oh, okay, I'll go. You know, I'll take the chance. And but before I went, I started listening to all of these recordings because I'd forgotten. Forgive the sirens, excuse me.
You're in New York.
I'm in Manhattan. This happens in my neighborhood all the time. But I listened to all the recordings because I had to remember my act. I hadn't done it in 7 months. And then when I was listening to it, I went, oh man, you know what? Because a lot of it was ship material. A lot of it was cruise ship material that I've never released before because I only do those on ships. Sure. And, you know, you heard all the complaints that passengers do and all that stuff. And
it's really funny.
The things with the crew and all that stuff.
You do not ever have to have gone on a cruise to enjoy this album. It's hilarious.
That's right. You don't have to. And so I said, okay, let me see if I can edit this together and see what I got. And so I edited about 35 minutes of it together. I thought I might release it as an EP or something. And then I sent it to my producers at Stand Up Records, who's released my albums. And he said, give me 10 more minutes and we're golden. So I got together 10 more minutes and went through some older recordings that I had. And then I gave him 45 minutes and he said, okay, let's release it. Give me a title. And I said, well, I'm gay and it's a bunch of straight people. And I want people to know that it was on a cruise ship. So I called it Gay Jokes for Straight Cruisers. And he edited it and divided it into tracks and registered it and, you know, submitted it around and then put it on iTunes. And it came out on Friday. And on Saturday morning, that sucker was #1 on the iTunes charts. And don't ask me. This is a nutty business.
Well, congratulations. And I hope that everybody that's listening goes and buys it. You've had an amazing career and you've always, always, always been genuine and kind to me. You reached out to me after I lost my gig at Sirius and we had the most thoughtful conversation. I will never forget that. And I will always appreciate you for that and just always being a cool guy to me. And it's great to have you on the podcast and congratulations. Go buy the album now, everybody. And all of the links are in the show notes. And I'm so proud of you and congratulations.
Thank you, yeah, if they buy it, I'll stay #1.
That's the idea. Forever.
Yeah, right. For a little bit.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pete.
Well, there you go. Jim David. His new album is out. Gay Jokes for Straight Cruisers. I bought it and I really enjoyed it. So funny. Jim's always been great, and I'm so glad that I was able to have a conversation with him and help him promote his album. People say they want more conversations like that, more just thoughtful conversations with people where we can learn a lot about different perspectives, different lives, choices, and always great to talk to thoughtful comedians, at least in my opinion. And follow him on Twitter, by the way, at Actual Jim David as well. All right, that's it for me today. That is a podcast episode number 334. I cannot thank you enough for listening, for giving me your feedback, for telling me your thoughts on things and stuff and the life and the world of yours. So please share. standupwithpete@gmail.com. I'm not sure that last sentence made any sense at all, but at the same time, are you really still listening? And if you are, thank you very much. Support the podcast with a paid subscription. Now, give a review, give a 5-star rating, and tell your friends. And no, if you're a member of the stand-up community, you are never alone. Always have a conversation going on the Discord platform, and I'll see you Thursdays at 8 for a virtual hangout if you're part of our community as well. And soon, we're going to get together in person. That's right. We'll figure it out some way, somehow, even if it's different regions of the country. I can't wait to meet you. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Love you. Bye. Take it away, John Carroll.
Thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and